drink champagne, some die of thirst. No way of knowing which way it's going. Hope for the best, expect the worst. Hope for the best.
Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, September 12th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine, reminding you that in just 64 days, I believe, we will be hosting the 13th, 14th, I can't remember what the count is, annual commentary roast with Natan Sharansky as the roastee, the greatest living Jewish hero. How can you roast the greatest living Jewish hero? You're going to have to come and find out how to come to the commentary roast by going to commentary.org/roast. We are filling up. So if this is something that is of interest to you, you need to arrange it now, particularly if you're coming in from out of town. So that is commentary.org/roast. And if you come, you will meet today's panel. An exciting panel today, unexpected twists and turns. Of course, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John. I like the of course. I'm not the exciting part.
You bring your own excitement with you wherever you go.
Yes.
Okay. And of course, fresh from every other podcast in America, media commentary columnist Christine Rosen, author of the new book, The Extinction of Experience. You can hear her talk about it on Jonah Goldberg's podcast. You can hear her talk about it upcoming on many other podcasts. Our own Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And special surprise guest, commentary podcast founder, the man with whom there would be no commentary podcast, the man who importuned me to start the commentary podcast, and the man who was on the podcast until, the middle of last year for its first 8 years of existence, National Review senior writer, Noah Rothman. Hi, Noah.
Hi, John. Bringing the excitement.
Yay!
No, we couldn't. We went through 2016 together. We went through 2020 together. We have the most important event of the presidential election so far, the actual election that's going to happen. We already had a more important event in the presidential election that didn't happen in June, since that event led to the presidential election that was supposed to happen not happening. But we've just had of course, the debate. We had our emergency podcast talk about the debate. You were on the National Review podcast yesterday to talk about the debate. We have some new pieces of data that actually, I think, incline us to continue talking about it. The main one being that it had an astoundingly large audience. 67 million people watched the debate on 14 different simulcast networks or something like that, making this, outside of sports, the most watched event on television in 10 years, something like that.
The streaming numbers are insane. Do you see the streaming numbers?
No, I didn't see the streaming
like
numbers.
7.4 million across Hulu, Disney Plus, and ABC owned apps. Another 2.3 million on Fox's apps, and so on and so on.
Okay, so we're
the
up
most
near
watched
80 million
ever.
Yeah. So I think there was a debate. I think back when there was only linear television and all of that, and they would simulcast the debates on all three networks, if I remember correctly. I think the the Reagan-Mondale debate got 90 million viewers in a country that was much smaller. But I mean, you literally don't have any common events like this at all outside of the Super Bowl. This will be is now already, I think, the second most watched thing in America this year, aside from the Super Bowl. And therefore, there are going to be more of them, right? We ended our podcast on the question of whether or not there would be more.
We got it exactly backward, though, it turns out. Because even whether we thought there would be or wouldn't be, the idea was that it would be in Kamala's hands. It would be up to her, because Trump would want one, and she would either rest, on her performance and try to hide again, or try to capitalize on it. But so far, it seems to have fallen out the other way. She's ready. She's her camp has said, yeah, sure, and Trump's not sure.
Well, so Christine, you on our Zoom here, you shook your head at the notion that there would be another debate.
Yeah, no, I think Trump doesn't want another debate. I think this showed his lack of discipline and the fact that so many people saw it. He also never likes to admit error. He came out of that debate saying, "This is the best debate I've ever had," and his team which is now including people who are probably encouraging an alternative reality bubble around him. People like Laura Loomer traveling with him probably told him he was fantastic and that he hit all the marks. And all those very online Republicans who support him are now really enthusiastic about him. I don't see any benefit for him believing them, but he probably will. He doesn't, all the stories we're seeing coming out of it is, we got to let Trump be Trump. Well, he was Trump and everyone saw it. He should do another debate, but it would only be useful for him if he could exercise some self-discipline.
Okay, let me just make the quick case that there has to be another debate or two or three. I don't care whether Trump wants to or doesn't want to or not. He will never again, from here until November, have an audience a tenth the size of this audience, and therefore he will never be able to revise or extend his remarks and do something about the impression that was left. He can walk around saying that he thought he had the best debate ever, and he can say that the online polls said weren't fair or something like that. 2/3 of the people who watched the debate, from what we can tell, thought that she won and he lost. He can't recover that ground without a comparable event where he can try to overcome that first impression. Otherwise, this is the thing that people are going to remember from this election.
Well, we don't know if he's lost ground at all. I mean,
we don't know. That's correct. Okay.
So this always happens where you watch these events, you have your first impression. It's a pretty well supported impression, which is that Trump did badly. And then inputs start showing up and you start second guessing yourself and overthinking things and saying, well, there was the dials and the independents on the dials. They actually, they kind of tracked with Republicans when Trump was talking here and there. And then you had the snap poll where CNN and Reuters, they're talking to undecided voters, and the undecided voters, they don't seem all that influenced by events. So maybe Trump didn't lose any ground at all. And I guarantee you that's what is in his ear today. Don't listen to the pundits. They don't know what they're talking about. You did great.
Okay, you're Donald Trump, and somebody says 80 million people watched you in that debate, and it was September 10th, and the election is November 5th. And every rally, everything, every appearance on Fox and Friends on the phone, every moment you sit with Hannity at some, ginned up town hall, all of that, that's all well and good. But when you add up all of those things together, they are not going to add up to the single audience size that watched on September 10th. And maybe it didn't lose ground, maybe this, maybe that. First of all, he loves...
It would be weird if he didn't lose ground.
Right. Now, let's say he doesn't. Even so, he loves an audience. He loves being on TV. And I find it now science fictional to think that we're just gonna leave it here. Christine, you're saying he would need enough self-knowledge to know that it would be better for him not to do it. Well, and that's the self-knowledge he doesn't have.
Right, but he could be tricked into it. Not tricked, but his advisors could do exactly what you just said and said, you need a big audience. The people want to hear from you again. It's a massive crowd size. Narcissistic math is almost as bad as Commentary Magazine podcast math. Like it's not real math.
I got a 630 on my math SAT. So I am not going to sit here.
I don't know what those numbers mean.
This from you.
As a humanities person, I say, great. I don't know what those numbers mean. But he could be maneuvered into it, I think. But a lot of what we don't know is, when he speaks on Truth Social or whatnot, or we hear these leaks from his campaign that end up getting laundered into the New York Times story the next day, I think he's declaring what he really feels. I think he thought he had a great night. And if he doesn't want to hear about that, he can still be maneuvered into more debates. I think it'd be good for the American people to have more debates. I'm not against that. We have a vice presidential debate coming up before that. But I do think he should insist on different moderators, a different approach. Maybe they do have more of a town hall thing. I would like to see them mix it up in under different circumstances than what we saw with the first Biden debate and now with the Harris debate.
But,
Okay, so
by the way,
oh, sorry.
I just want to say, if he thinks that he had a good debate, then he will not have anything resembling discipline next time. I mean, if he thought this worked for him.
If J.D. Vance has a good debate, he'll probably want to have another debate.
That's a really good point. That is a very good point.
That is a very interesting point. Or he'll fire J.D. Vance. Remember, on The Apprentice, if you watch The Apprentice, he had this great co-star. Like, he had this woman, Carolyn, who was his like number 2 on The Apprentice, and she was great, and everybody loved her. So he fired her because she was getting too much praise. So even though she was like a popular feature of a popular television show, and you don't you don't get rid of Fonzie because
I was going to say
Ron
Vanna
Howard
White.
is jealous. Vanna White. Okay. Anyway, but let's dig down a little bit. So I'm saying there will be at least another debate, if not 2, and that there will be a debate in which they try to shake up the format. There will be a town hall, something like that. The classic 3-debate format, right, is you have the first debate on domestic affairs, you have the second debate either on foreign policy or it's some kind of a town hall, and then the third debate is on foreign affairs. Now, maybe they'll just sort of default to that as a kind of general matter. And one of the reasons this debate, I think, was so odd is that they were bouncing. There was no consistency to the approach that the moderators were taking, aside from whether or not the moderators were biased or all of that. They start here, they go there, they're on abortion, suddenly they're on Ukraine, then they're back to Israel. They go off to talk about January 6th. They're like, we have all these little things we need to mention because otherwise maybe no one will ask them about this ever again. And I think we have to fact check him because he lies so much. And, we don't seem to have to fact check her because we work for her, and however you want to slice it. Okay. So, but let's game out the thing that Noah said about whether people overthink or don't overthink, or think in longer terms than, oh my God, what just happened in front of me last night? Because the first debate, we came out and we're like, oh my God, what just happened? And that was the thing, right? It was like, okay, something major needs to happen here because this is not good. Or I'm going to lay out a theory, and Seth, I have to give credit to Seth Mandel, not here today, laid this out on our emergency podcast a little bit. And then I was thinking about it more in terms of a couple of the other issues. So Trump didn't win any exchange. He seemed crazy, couldn't understand what he was saying, all of that. But 2 different things he did, which is that he hammered, right? He hammered and hammered. And he said, she's against fracking, she's against fracking, she's against fracking, she's against fracking. Really in the last third of the debate. She said, I'm not against fracking. I was the tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act that had allowed for more fracking. That is not true. That is not what was in the Inflation Reduction Act. The inflation featured offshore oil leases for oil exploitation, which is a thing, but that is not fracking. Fracking is hydraulic fracturing of coal-based oil underground in America, on the American continent.
Liquid natural gas.
Right, exactly. Okay, so that is not what offshore oil drilling is. Okay, so she said, I'm for oil, or something like that. And he said, she's against fracking, she's against fracking, she's against fracking. Why does this matter? Well, okay, so if neurolinguistic programming, this idea that if you say something enough times and yammer into somebody's head, it kind of gets planted there even though they don't pay attention. 200,000 jobs or something like that in Pennsylvania depend on fracking. Pennsylvania is the state that is going to decide the election still, unless somehow everything goes haywire this week, because the debate was so lopsided for Harris that she charges into big leads in North Carolina and Georgia and then upends the map. But if that's not the case, Pennsylvania remains the bellwether state, or not even the bellwether, it is the state that will decide the election. more jobs in Pennsylvania depend on fracking than in any other state. And if enough people who are in that industry or ancillary to the industry, not just work in it, but like have the stores in the towns where people are fracking and all of that, get it into their heads because of the way Trump did this, that I better worry about Kamala Harris and fracking. This is my livelihood. This is it. Like, this is the one issue. I care about inflation. I care about this. But I mean, this is me. This is me and my family and all of that. I don't know. Maybe that'll sink in over time. Maybe that sunk in on Tuesday night. Seth suggested that was the case. And the more I thought about it yesterday, the more I thought maybe he's onto something. Because if you're a radio host in Harrisburg or a radio host, in Reading or something, and you just play those clips over and over, or they do it on the podcast, the Right Wing Bro podcast that people out there listen to. I don't know. Noah, what's your...
Maybe my assumption is that if you are that close to the ground and that close to the industry, you're already very hypersensitive to what the administration does to that industry. So when Joe Biden got into office, he imposed a fracking ban on federal lands. And then last year, functionally put a halt to American liquid natural gas exports by putting this moratorium on the construction of these new terminals. And you're probably aware of that, and you probably resent it. And if you don't resent it or don't know about it, I'm not sure you have that much of attachment to an industry. You would need that case made for you in more parochial terms, like how this affects your wallet. And nobody in the press is going to do that. Harris campaign is going to do that. I don't think the Trump campaign is capable of doing that. So on the margins, maybe, but as a broad mobilizing message, it would require more discipline, I think, from Republicans. But the opening is there. Seth is right.
So, but again, I think this again gets to the point of the size of this audience, because you're saying it needs ancillary attention, and I'm saying the ancillary attention is now like pipsqueak compared to what happened on Monday night or whatever night that was. I don't even know, Tuesday night, I guess. And so if he hammered it, enough people heard it, and it's an earworm, and this is a state that is a 1-point race. 40,000 people win that state for one or the other of them. And she made this weird point of saying, you're being very insulting to the 800,000 Polish people who live in Pennsylvania. I guess about NATO? Was she talking about NATO?
She was talking about Ukraine.
Okay.
She was talking about Ukraine.
I was unaware that Americans of Polish origin are particularly obsessed and consumed with the glories of NATO. I love NATO. I don't really think that one can really focus in on the Polish NATO connection.
But no, but her point was about his being chummy with Putin and protecting Putin.
Right, I understand that, but
allegedly,
this is a little
Polish Americans.
Look, we Jews hate the czars and hate Russia because of the treatment of our people by the czars in Russia. Polish Americans are here a very long time, and I don't know how much connection they have to Poland's relations with Putin's Russia. I think that was a bit of a stretch. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they have polling data to suggest this was a place. She did it for some reason. Okay.
Can I ask you one more beat on the fracking question? Are you, because I want to make sure, are you saying that she was saying I'm not against fracking, I'm not against fracking over and over again, so that people would believe she's not against fracking, even though
I'm saying Trump said she's against fracking.
Okay, but then she said, that is not true. I signed this and that. But if you go to her policy proposal and search for fracking, it doesn't appear. So you're saying she's trying to fool voters in Pennsylvania to think she's not as radical? No, I mean, I just want...
Really?
Right.
And I thought she was so, she wasn't disingenuous at all night.
But that's where actually either the moderators should have done this job, or in fact, it was Trump's job to say, where in your recent policy platform does it say you will allow fracking? I mean, it doesn't.
I was very clear in 2020 that Joe Biden supports fracking. I mean, that's not what she said, but that's effectively what happened.
People don't expect gaslighting from a female candidate in some ways. So, like, there's a sense in which she'll say things, she'll assert things that aren't true, but she keeps insisting on them, and this is one of them. Okay, I just want to clarify.
Okay, if that's right, if you're right, then what I'm saying will not be effective.
No, let's talk about Pennsylvania for a little bit, because I've been doing a fair amount of research into the ground game there. Jake Tapper, after the debate, asked Governor Josh Shapiro, indirectly because the mics weren't working, where should the campaign focus, the Harris campaign? Should it focus on driving up the numbers? It obviously wants to drive up numbers in the T. Big red T in the state. On the one side, you have dark blue Pittsburgh. The other side, you have dark blue Philadelphia. And should they focus on driving up the numbers in Pittsburgh, white working class voters, where they're sending Joe Biden, of all people, to shore up Kamala Harris's deficits with that demographic? Or should they focus on the collar counties, counties around suburban Philadelphia? And Josh Shapiro says, well, you got to get every vote, and then spent the remainder of the time talking about the collar counties. This makes sense to me, and it makes sense to me in regards to the granular data that Kamala Harris let slip in that debate stage with those Polish Americans, because I've been diving into the GOTV operation. There was a very interesting piece in The Guardian by Hugo Lowell, who zoomed into the state and zoomed in on the Trump campaign's efforts there, and they're behind the eight ball, according to him. RNC, when the Trump family took over the RNC, they threw out the plan, right? The plan was to have all these field offices, all these staffers, and they're starting from scratch. So right now they have 50 staffers in Pennsylvania, the Trump campaign, to Kamala Harris's 375 in Pennsylvania alone. They're doing exactly what Mitt Romney did in 2012. They're outsourcing voter contacts to PACs. They count and Romney's counted voter contacts as like leaving a flyer on a door, as opposed to multiple face-to-face conversations with prospective voters, low propensity voters. This feels like a campaign that's data heavy, the Harris campaign, and the Trump campaign doesn't. It's sort of winging it. And that makes all the difference, obviously, in a 1-point race. I would not be surprised if Kamala Harris invoked the Polish American diaspora in Pennsylvania for a very good reason. Quite sure they have data that suggests that and other crucial demographics are critical to winning a state that'll go one way or the other by 50,000 votes.
Look, you are absolutely right. That's why I brought this up, is that it was a weird thing to do. You were talking, I mean, it's probably the first time in American political history that somebody has mentioned the Polish vote in Pennsylvania in a national election. I mean, classically, by the way, the Polish vote, if you were gonna go in for a Polish vote talk, you would do it in Chicago, where there were a million people of Polish origin, and that would be a place you would go just in one city. That's where the Pope went in 1979.
Milwaukee. That's where
Milwaukee, but
grandmother,
Milwaukee's small, right?
Polish,
okay, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, but so it was striking. It was a striking moment of. Really? And so you go, well, there's got to be a reason that it happened. And yeah, they are taking Pennsylvania, the Democrats are taking Pennsylvania, and they are chopping it up into tiny little bits and trying to figure out where they can wring the vote out that they need. Because until this week, this was the one state that you could argue her arrival in the race had no net positive effect. The polling in Pennsylvania, from when Biden was there to when Trump was there, maybe she closed the gap up a little bit, but Trump in most of the polling did not lose ground in Pennsylvania whatsoever after Biden's departure. And it seems sticky. It seems like his vote in Pennsylvania is sticky, and she's got to do something. She's got to gin up voters who might not otherwise have voted. And so if the state is up for grabs and she thinks there's a way to play this game, assuming that the Trump campaign hasn't lost its mind the way it feels like it's lost its mind a little bit with what it did to screw up the get out the vote effort at the RNC, they also have some sense of the granularity of the vote, but their big play is rural Pennsylvania voters overwhelmingly either know people or are personally involved in or get their livelihoods from or are dependent on the livelihoods of others from fracking, which is a 15-year-old industry. I just want to remind people, we keep talking about how, well, oh my God, Silicon Valley came out of nowhere and it's so incredible, this new industry that's changing America. There was no fracking in the United States until 2007. It is now 2024. We are now a net exporter of oil because this technology became mature almost instantly. Tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars of massive infrastructure investments have gone into making it possible not only to pull it out of the ground, but to get it into pipelines, to flow it down to the Gulf of Mexico, to get it out on ships. It's an astonishing development that is like one of the most undercovered industrial stories in world history. The complete creation of a gigantic industry. And Pennsylvania is at the heart of it. I mean, it's not the only state that's at the heart of it. The Dakotas are at the heart of it. Colorado's at the heart of it. But Pennsylvania is the key here. And I'm just saying he could just spend 2 months talking about fracking off of what he did last. Maybe it's an earworm. Maybe got the bug in the ear, and that it was a less unsuccessful debate than we think, because we were judging it on performance and general questions of fitness. And in that way, debate was great for her. I think unambiguously great for her. Like, she passed she's not Biden, she's not senile, she's not this. And did she look credible as a president? I guess so.
The bar was low for that, but a lot of swing voters that were polled, Sarah Longwell did a sort of instant poll of voters and wrote it up for the Atlantic. They did. That is one of the things that they were quite positive about with her performance, and I think that's generally just because she didn't word salad a lot of her answers, and she was
very clear. Decisive. She wasn't nervous. She was more in command of herself and her emotions and her message than he was, and therefore, if this kabuki shadow game of how you do in a debate is how you're going to judge whether somebody can be president, which of course is ridiculous. It's the worst possible way to judge how somebody's going to be president, because what matters is what they talk about when you're not looking at them, not what they talk about when you are looking at them. She cleared the bar very effectively. Second issue I want to bring up is immigration, which of course he went crazy on. And Noah, you said that night, you said on the editor's podcast yesterday, once he went into their eating dogs, the whole debate was then, that's it. Debates are about moments, and he said they're eating dogs.
Pity the people who tuned in at just that moment. I know two of them, and they said, I just instantly turned it off. I didn't know what was happening.
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you what, though.
That's where I want to go. Let's go to, I'll tell you what, though. Go ahead.
I still think that's true. But the analysis was predicated on the assumption that most voters didn't see it. And most voters would only see clips of the event, and that was obviously the poll. That was what you were going to see tomorrow morning on the morning shows when you're, getting the kids ready and heading out. I don't know if my analysis holds if the audience is as large as it could be. If we're talking about 70, 80 million people who saw the entire debate, they might come away with a much more fulsome impression of what they saw on that stage. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to come away with the impression that Trump was good. I would be surprised if they did. But they probably saw more than just the clip, which is the highlight clip. I mean, in 10 years from now, we will remember this debate, if we remember it at all, as the they're eating pets debate.
Yeah.
It's funny. I have, during the debate, or right after, liberal friends of mine, Democratic supporting friends of mine, who are, they're not news junkies, texted me and said, God, he was all this crazy stuff he was saying. What was this stuff about? And it wasn't about the dogs. What is this stuff about Kamala supporting taxpayer transgender surgery for illegals? I said, that's 100% true.
Right.
They thought that was the crazy thing.
Okay, so that was point number 3, and I want to come back to that, but I do want to talk about the dogs and immigration. So watch it, and I was like, oh my God, he's so crazy. This is so crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And now I'm going to play H.L. Mencken and go with let's assume the American people are stupid, and they're stupid, and they get what they get what they get, and they're going to get it good and hard. Immigration is one of the 2 leading issues in the election. Both those issues incline toward Trump, or very much are in Trump's camp, right? That's inflation, the economy, and immigration. And he went with the most ridiculous aspect of everything is out of control with immigration, and they let it go out of control. I had it under control. They let it go out of control, which is the largest message. And it's like, why would you go there? And then again, thinking about it during the day and going with the Mencken, the American people are stupid argument, crystallizing the discomfiture of Americans with runaway problems at the border, for most of whom they are distant, but they're nervous. Like if they don't live in a border state, or they don't live in a major city where suddenly there's a big influx of migrants, those major cities are all going to vote Democratic. So, as a matter of course, the 10 major cities in the country are the reliable base of the Democratic Party. So the fact that, in my neighborhood, there are, 100 people standing around industriously, cutting up melon and selling it on a street corner or something like that. They're not, lying around and, being gangs and stuff like that. But it's a change in the streetscape. It's very, very evident. But so that's where most of it's happening. And then it's happening in the border states. Okay. But if you want to crystallize American discomfort with the changes in society that are being wrought by the fact that 10 to 20 million people have come in the last 4 years, and you're Trump, and you don't care whether it's true or not, and you're kind of like a purple, you go very purple and very melodramatic with all of your stuff. Getting it into people's heads that people are coming into this country and they're out of control and they're kidnapping dogs and eating them, just pull back a little bit. And let me just tell you a quick story, and then we can go to the discussion. I have friends. They live in northern Westchester County. They have 2 little dachshunds. This is a dog story. This is a what people are like when they have dogs story. And there were stories that may be apocryphal and may be real, that there was a point at which hawks were flying around in northern Westchester County, swooping down on backyards, grabbing little dogs in their talons and flying away with them to eat them. This is a real thing that people talk about in northern Westchester County here in New York State. And my friends don't let their dogs go outside the house unless they're on a leash. They have a couple of acres. It's beautiful. The dogs could run around in their yard. They won't let them because they're afraid of the hawks that could come and eat their dachshunds. Multiply them by a couple million people in the United States and say, there are these people, they just came into this country 4 years ago. They're hungry, they're poor, they don't have any food, and they come from a different culture, and they're taking our dogs. Now, call me crazy, say that I'm an idiot, say that I'm, being unfair to the American people. Maybe that's sticky. In other words, maybe you need some kind of weird objective correlative or metaphor for what it is that's going on, that has changed the country because of unrestrained illegal immigration. You're on mute, Christine.
It's fear-based, and it works because it's fear-based, but it starts the story at the point where the context that comes before would totally undermine the fear. And that's that Springfield and other Rust Belt towns that had dwindling populations were actively seeking foreigners who would come and live and work in their towns to revive the town because people were moving away, industries were dying, they needed workers. So that, if you start the story there and then you say, this is going on, we're fearful of these groups' ability to assimilate, then you're actually having a long-standing historical debate in the United States about how we assimilate people who come to this country and want to live here. That's boring, and that doesn't get people out of their house to vote. So I do think in that sense, as a fear-based get out the vote strategy on the right, of course it works. The problem is it's wrong. It's factually wrong, but it's also historically and culturally a debate that we can have on its own terms that's useful and appropriate. And the point about, I think, that it coming up in the Harris and Trump discussion is that neither one of them is capable of having that debate as our leading candidates for office.
Right.
See,
so I'm
okay,
sorry.
You're very noble. I'm just saying that's a very noble reading of what I just said, which is I just said that the major presidential candidate of the Republican Party is going around retailing a ridiculous story about how immigrants are eating dogs. And then I'm trying to ask, because maybe that's not dumb. Maybe he did something that has his weird, if you'll excuse the pun, animal cunning, that it's sticky, it's going to get in people's heads, and that there are enough lunatics in the country who are going to go, I can't vote for her. She's for people coming in here and eating my dog. Now, maybe, again, 80 million people watched. Okay, Abe, I'm sorry.
I think it's simpler than that. I think he thinks Haitians are eating people's pets. I mean, I do. I think it's sticky in his head. I think the second he heard the story, he was like, "Yeah, it must be true." And if he
said he saw it on TV,
right? I'm sure
it's got to be true. He saw it on TV.
Whatever he considers TV, he saw it on some screen. And if he had heard the sort of corrections on it and the debunkings of it, I'm sure he said, "Well, you can't trust them. Of course, they're not going to tell you the real story. I'm sure they're eating the pets."
I mean, as a normative matter, we should all object to something that's not true being retailed by a presidential candidate.
I stipulate.
And I get it.
I object.
But when Tim Walz is retailing the notion that J.D. Vance fornicated a couch, wasn't true.
Yes.
But it had the feel of something they wanted to promote, and it kind of got sticky, and maybe it made you a little queasy and uncomfortable with the guy, and that was valuable, right? But was it? Has it manifested in any material benefit for this campaign? And does
Project 25 has.
So here we go. So does that Trump line, the cats and dogs thing, does that have some kind of psychological triggering effect where you're subconsciously now associating kind of xenophobic narratives with these immigrants? Yes, okay, very. With these immigrants. Does that counteract the fact that people are very discomfited by and frustrated by and tired of Donald Trump's all-consuming personality and the kind of things that when he was president would dominate a news cycle for 2, 3, 4 days and were just exhausting? Does that animate more voters than it subtracts from his column?
Right. I am only trying in this peroration here, or this conversation, to see whether you can see any upside to Trump's performance on Tuesday night. And this is so far what I've come up with. So that the dog thing might work and that yelling about fracking might work. Okay. He
had good moments.
He did?
I don't remember if you guys discussed it on yesterday's podcast, but late in the game, when he realized he had to play both moderator and debater, and he turned to Kamala Harris and tried to get her on the record on late-term abortion, and she kind of weaseled her way out of it. And this is something that hits her hard on her biggest advantage in this election. People don't like late-term abortions. Even people who are pro-choice don't like late-term abortions. And she would not get on the record on that one. And
the moderator lied for her. The moderator lied on her behalf.
But Donald Trump cannot articulate what the issue is. It is not that they're slaughtering children. It is that
they weren't executing babies.
No, and he doesn't understand it. He doesn't understand that they're withholding care to children who are born viable in a late-term abortion process. He can't articulate that. He doesn't get it. He's not a good proponent of your values, people. If you're still waiting for him to be the guy who's going to be advancing your values with care and concern, he's not the guy. But he did put her on the hot spot. And it could have some legs. I think she failed at her primary objective. As I wrote it yesterday on National Review, her primary objective was to make herself more known, better known to the public, which is why she said the word plan 870 times in 90 minutes just to, talk about neurolinguistic programming, just to let you know she has a plan. You don't have to know what the plan is. She's got a plan. And to distance herself from the Biden administration, sufficient to create enough distance to satisfy people who don't like the Biden administration without alienating the Democrats who do. She didn't do either. Not effectively.
So we are today, by the way, we are closing our October issue of Commentary. I want to talk a little bit about the piece that Christine has in the issue, but a piece that Matt Continetti, also not here today, has in the issue, points out that she needed to define herself as separate from Biden. And so she said, I'm not Joe, but look at me, I'm not Joe Biden, right? She said that to him. And then she's running on Joe Biden's record. She actually did not separate herself from Biden. She did not say, here's one way I'm going to do something differently. We've had some disagreements inside the councils of power that I have expressed my views. He's incredibly respectful, but, he went another way. I'm going to go this way.
Oddly, Trump did that with Vance on a board. Like in a way, he kind of signaled
he said
that
JD has his opinions and I have mine, or something like that. So in effect, she needs to separate herself from Biden, and she did not do that. And again, assuming that everything she did was purposeful because she was very well programmed. She clearly thinks that Biden defines the Democrats, that if she does that, she's going to do that in a sister soldier-y way. Like she's going to have to sort of move to his right. And she doesn't want to move to his right because she needs every Democratic left of center vote.
See, I actually think she's not entirely separating from Biden because she's so far to the left. She is one of the most progressive, by judging by her voting record, one of the most progressive Democrats in the party. She actually needs to stay closer to Biden. There's a reason he was the choice in the primary before.
I think that's
he is more to the center, and so she can't say that because she, a lot of her support comes from that far left. Mm-hmm. She doesn't want to be seen by those moderate swing independent voters as too extreme, and that's one way to do it without saying it out loud. And I think it's a tough needle to thread.
So you're saying for her just to be on the Biden record is the sister soldier moment.
Well,
for
the
her
left,
she is. Yeah, that's as controversial
Genocide
as
Joe,
she's willing to get. Yeah.
Right.
I think that's a very interesting way of looking at it. Now, you, Christine, have written a piece which we call the Kamala Cookbook, which is about the absolute refusal of the press to write about how she secured this nomination in 3.5 seconds with no controversy whatsoever, or not a single person in a party of 40 million members standing up and saying, you know what, I would actually like to run for this office now that he has stepped down. I think I have something to contribute, and maybe we shouldn't just be rushing into her. That was completely made impossible. One guy in Minnesota ran against Biden saying he was too old. Did anybody go back and say, maybe we should give Dean Phillips a second look because he was the one guy willing to say what no one else was willing to say? So how does that fact that you write about in this really wonderful piece, which will be up on our website tomorrow, how does that comport with our general complaints about the moderation, would you say? I think we could probably put them together into a narrative.
Well, so two things. I think the narrative everybody just wants to accept is that, well, of course, she's the obvious choice. And she did get votes because she ran as a vice president and they voted for a ticket. And she then also gets the piles and piles of cash that have already been raised for this campaign. Yes, that's a practical check mark. But what people don't understand about Harris is that the protective bubble around which I think Jill Biden, Hunter Biden, the very, very close Biden aides have kept him, included keeping press out and away from him. She benefits benefited from that as vice president. She actively cultivated personal relationships with a lot of the Washington press corps. She would invite them over to the vice president's mansion. She'd have them for, drinks in the garden. And and this is, I would say in the last year and a half, 2 years, last year and a half, she did this because she also was not super friendly with the White House press corps at the beginning. And there were a lot of leaks from her, obviously constant churn of disgruntled staff members. So she has been cultivating these people, and that helped her with her bloodless coup, or whatever you want to call it. And the press wanted to tell a story that would still ultimately protect Joe Biden's reputation in the Democratic Party. So that became, Nancy Pelosi has saved us from ourselves, and we should, she's so tough. And look, she's at the end of her career anyway, so there's no harm in kind of turning her into the mafia enforcer. Everyone avoided asking, what was Harris doing? There were these vague reports of she's making lots of calls. She feels she has to earn this nomination. No, something else went down very swiftly, which suggests she had plans in place for some time in the event. And we know she knew this event was likely because she's the one who works closely, supposedly, with Biden and saw him. She's the one with the constitutional power to have him begin the process of removing him from office. She knew. She must have been making plans. I don't think we'll ever hear that story in the near future, but that's a story the American people should know at some point, because it's interesting politically. There are a lot of ambitious people in the Democratic Party who would like to have had an open primary, Gavin Newsom among them. The fact that it didn't happen and it all happened quickly isn't just, oh, well, okay, they're scared of Trump. That's part of it. Oh, it's about money. That's part of it. There's a third part there that I think we're missing, and it has to do with the role of the press.
I mean, also, it's worth mentioning that the press never delved into what I think we all thought was a potentially scandalous aspect of Kamala's role in the administration, which is, when did you know, Vice President, that Joe Biden was having real cognitive issues and was a liability? And what did you do about it? And for how long did you do it? And who else did it? And never came up.
Right.
She has never said that she thought that he should step down. And she has not said that he had cognitive issues.
Right.
She has never given an opening for that. The last time she spoke about it, she defended him against the Robert Hur, I can't prosecute him because no jury will convict a dribbling, senile, amiable old man who can't even remember the year that his son died.
Well,
and she was like, this is outrageous. How dare you, blah, blah, blah. But to be fair to her, she hasn't stepped off that. There hasn't been any movement. All we know is that he called her and said, I'm not running. And she said, are you okay? All I wanted to know was whether he was okay. So she hasn't provided that, I don't know what you would call it, that accelerant to the story.
No.
Okay. Noah, you and I think, are among the people who are least concerned about the role of the moderators, which set everybody's hair on fire. I'm just saying that on the right, this idea that, this was, and Abe said that he thought that this might have been the most important aspect of the debate when we did our podcast on Tuesday night. This, tilting toward the Harris and fact checking Trump and all of that. Are you how are you feeling again after 36 hours? How are you feeling about the moderation question?
So the moderation was terrible. This is a source of profound consternation for me and my fellow conservative colleagues, because there's debate over just how egregious the moderation was. And I feel like we're talking past one another, because we all agree that the fact-checking live was a bad idea. They bungled it because they fact-checked in the wrong direction. They only fact-checked Donald Trump and not Kamala Harris, although they let plenty of Donald Trump misstatements and fabrications slide. Nevertheless, when they dove in, it was to back Kamala Harris. And why we're talking past one another is not because we disagree that the moderation was awful and that the question selection was awful. We're all on the same page. What we disagree on is the degree to which that bias is surmountable. is something that a deft, adroit campaigner can turn against the moderators. And this is something I've been saying for quite some time. I feel like because this is the third consecutive Trump nomination, a lot of Republicans forget what it's like to have a capable, cogent, disciplined representative of their interests on that stage. Donald Trump did not make anything of the moderator's behavior. Maybe he was flustered. Maybe he was in his own head. Who knows? But he did not turn the tables on the moderator, as many competent, capable Republicans have done. I was saying on the podcast yesterday that I kind of fell a little bit in January of 2012 for Newt Mentum when he made the moderators into a player in the game, which makes them very, very uncomfortable, because the press never ever wants to be the primary actor in the drama. They want to play in the sandbox, but then ascend to 30,000 feet and assume this omniscient third person role when it suits them. But Newt Gingrich turns the table. Mitt Romney turns the tables. Everybody remembers him being on kind of the back foot in the second debate in 2012 with Candy Crowley, and Candy Crowley intervened more than once on Barack Obama's behalf. But Mitt Romney got down on the mattresses with Candy Crowley in ways that Donald Trump does not. Donald Trump is not capable. He does not have the dexterity to think on his feet in that moment and to make media bias into a factor in whatever the exposition is he's in the middle of. And he could have easily done it there. What, are you going to fact check her at any point, moderators? What is this? What kind of a debate is this? All of a sudden, he's the underdog. All of a sudden, he's behind the eight ball, and he's being treated unfairly and persecuted, and that is his wheelhouse. And that's what his
why
voters
he needs another debate. That's why he needs another debate. What do you think he'd do in the second debate? The second debate will be about the first debate. He'll talk for 20 minutes about how ABC was unfair to him. That's going to be the thing that gets him back on that debate stage.
Maybe. But just to put a period on the point is that it's not as though media bias is new. It's not as though these rules are new. They're unfair. They stink. I don't like them. But this is a fact of nature, and it is a navigable one for people who understand the political environment.
Because it's not only navigable, but it is exploitable, and it can turn you. I mean, this was not a debate. George H.W. Bush arguably saved his presidential bid in 1988 when Bob Dole was charging at him by getting into a fight live on CBS Evening News with Dan Rather. Dan Rather came at him and said, people are calling you a wimp or something like that. And Bush went ballistic. And of course, the charge itself was insanely offensive. He was rather saying they're talking to a guy who had flown 58 combat missions in World War II and had gotten shot down in shark-infested waters where he had to tread water for 8 hours. Like, how dare he? And that was actually a moment when the country then became acquainted with Bush's war record, which he was not in the habit of talking about because he basically objected to this line being thrown at him. Skilled Republicans, do what you're talking about, right? And even Trump does it, but he always did it inside the Republican context, meaning got mad at Megyn Kelly in 2016, right, for saying people have called you this and said you're a misogynist and all of that. And then he went on and said, I hear she was basically having her period, right? That was but who was that for? That was for the bro. We didn't know his communication strategy with this Republican base that we didn't know existed yet. But he was like, she was so mean to me because she was on the rag, basically is what he was saying. And we thought, my God, he's so disgusting. This is insane. And it wasn't at all. It's just that he was talking to people in a different language. And he didn't know how to do what now he'll do it. And maybe it'll be too late. But it is, again, there's a kind of basic competency issue. Like, every Republican has this in there, should have this.
If you're a Republican
101.
Running for any office, and again, there's so much presidential bias that when I make this point, that people come back at me and say, well, Donald Trump was the only person since George W. Bush to overcome this. That assumes that there are no down ballot races, that there are no other Republicans in the country who navigate media bias on the state, local, and federal level. They do. It is a core competency that you must possess as a Republican running for office.
Tom Cotton's very good at it. Tom Cotton, for the last few weeks, has been doing this, a masterclass in how to do this as a Republican.
Right, but Tom Cotton is a combative, tough, you come at me, I'm going to come right back at you. And then there are other styles. There was Glenn Youngkin's style, which is you're an extremist, and Glenn Youngkin's like, me, look at me, I'm in my I have
a fleece vest on.
I'm in my fleece. Do I look like a crazy person to you? What is Larry Hogan doing in Maryland right now? Larry Hogan, there is a tied Senate race in Maryland that ordinarily you would figure the Democrat would be up by 15 points. Now, he was the popular Republican governor of Maryland, and he's running for Senate, so he was going to do better than the generic Republican in that state. But you cannot take Larry Hogan and turn him into Donald Trump. He not only does he resist that, they know him, number one, and number two, he knows how to play this game. He won as a Republican in a very Democratic state twice. So, there are ways and ways to do this that aren't just yelling at the moderator or talking about there are 10 different off-the-shelf how to run as a Republican against a biased media thing. And it's not just that Trump is sort of indisciplined. It's this total lack of respect he has for any kind of, it's like if you're a chess player and you don't go back and study a really great game. Yeah, you're going to lose because the other guy who's playing has studied the other great games and knows the, Rappaccini Gambit or the so-and-so move from 1832. And he thinks, I can just get on a plane with Laura Loomer at 6. I can get off the plane at 8. I can go onto that stage and do what I do. And man, people just love me.
But he also, I think part of the issue is that Kamala Harris so effectively got under his skin that he was just focused on her. That was the thing that he just wanted to zing back at her. The moderators barely existed for him.
Which is why he should not want a second debate or any other debates for that matter.
Okay, so
it's not a great format for him.
Okay, but again, we don't have the data. So if the race doesn't change, maybe he doesn't need a second debate. But do you want to go out, it's like, do you want to go out on that? Do you want to go out on the not right, never write again after the novel that you just wrote got the worst reviews of your career? Or, the movie you made is the one that, earned the least at the box office forever? You want to change the narrative. The narrative is you had a big debate and you blew it. And maybe he can lie to himself and say that he didn't. I guess, but then,
that's exactly what he does. He's lying to himself about losing the last election.
If you don't think you ever go out, why would you think that you went out on a low note?
Okay, let's talk about that for 2 seconds. We didn't talk about that on the emergency podcast. Was when they said you said to, I can't remember who it was, Lex Fried. You said to somebody,
it was a radio show he went on.
Right,
recently.
We lost by a whisper.
He
right,
grudgingly acknowledged he lost.
Right,
yes.
And then he said, "I was being facetious."
Oh God!
Something
like
sarcastic.
That.
I was being. It's something.
I was being sarcastic. Right. Now, this, by the way, matters because it does matter if he acknowledges that he doesn't think he won. If the J6 case in front of Tanya Chutkin goes forward, if he acknowledges that he won, that can be used materially as evidence in the case on January 6th. Because his argument is I have rights of free speech. I believe I won the election and that they lost, and I'm allowed to say that, and you can't tell me that I can't. But if they can prove that he thought that he lost and nonetheless did this anyway, then I don't quite know how this plays. But then he is sort of like the idea that he could have been involved in a conspiracy to overturn the results based on bad faith or whatever then becomes a real thing. So at least his animal cunning saved himself from handing Jack Smith an important piece of data spoken in front of 80 million people where he's like, yeah, okay, I lost this time, I'm going to win. Okay, Thank you very much. Let's send you to jail. And maybe this is the last thing. Like, he needs another debate. He needs to win this election. He needs to win this election because he is going to get sentenced in November in New York City. I mean, the stakes, I always thought this was like a silly thing to like have as the major issue for why he would be running again. But I mean, the stakes are now existentially high for him. And his indiscipline in losing this debate, if he has any self-protective instincts whatsoever, he will not only want 2 more debates, but he will actually prepare for them. Because, okay, Christine, because we're not on video yet, though, we will soon be on YouTube. That's a soft announcement I'm making, that the Commentary Podcast will be on YouTube in a couple of weeks.
Who got
Just gave you my Kamala arched brow. Yeah, thank you, Noah.
Okay,
that's
anyway. But
God help us all.
But so you can see Christine making her face.
I'm going like
prepare
this.
And yes,
very Kamala face.
Yes, I don't think. I just want to add. Noah also had that skeptic's face on too. I don't think he's capable at this stage of doing that. Now he might, make a pretense of perhaps, having some better and more succinct talking points, but particularly if it's a town hall, he'll assume he can feed off the crowd. He'll assume, he's good. Actually, he's much better in those settings than he is in the setting he had in the first place. So I don't think he's a guy who prepared. We should just, one more note on the Laura Loomer thing. What is she doing on his plane? What is she doing in his ear? That worries me. I mean, he is in his strange way, very vulnerable is not a word people use with Trump, but he's quite vulnerable to the sorts of people, courtiers who whisper things in his ear, conspiracy theories that feed that ego. And right now is exactly the moment where he should be distancing himself from those people and surrounded by professionals.
Did you read that Semaphore piece yesterday on this, where you have the Republic doing the whole what the czar doesn't know what's happening in the countryside thing? The mad monk was mesmerized, the little father. We must save him. He's under the spell of her wiles. This is all him, guys.
Yes,
this is all him.
Okay, he wants someone to walk beside him, whispering in his ears,
"Where's Melania?
Caesar, thou aren't mortal. Right. Caesar, thou art immortal." I was thinking about this in relation to James Earl Jones, who, of course, sadly passed the other day. And one of the seminal theater-going experiences of my life was the first time I went to Shakespeare in the Park in New York, and I saw James Earl Jones as King Lear. And King Lear, of course, there's a dynamic in the play King Lear where King Lear has his fool, right? The kind of the person who is there to entertain him during the day when he gets bored. His private stand-up comedian, the fool. And the thing about the fool is the only person in the camp, camp followers of King Lear, who can speak the truth to him, because he does it in riddles and jokes and things. And he basically says, "You're a senile old fool. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this to your daughter? Look what nature is doing to your kingdom because you have done such a terrible thing. What the hell is the matter with you?" And Donald Trump does not have a fool. He does not have a person anywhere in his ambit who tells him the truth. Not to again go into history, but Karl Rove could tell George W. Bush the truth. Roger Ailes could tell George H.W. Bush the truth. I told this story a couple of weeks ago that Ailes had told me that when they'd finished the convention and when summer was over in '88 and polls had Dukakis up in double digits, and they had a big meeting, and Barbara Bush said, I don't think we should go negative. We need to run a positive. Negative campaigns, people don't like them, and we need a negative campaign. And Ailes said to her, "Sure, Barbara, we can run a positive campaign. George is wonderful, and I love him, and he's the greatest vice president ever, and a war hero, and a noble guy. And we can run a positive campaign and lose by 7 points. Or we can run a tough, hard campaign that defines Dukakis and makes him look like an idiot and makes us look like we're strong, and then we can win the election. Which do you want? Do you want to win or do you want to lose?" And I think probably the next 2 months really depend on the possibility that there is somebody, and I don't know who that is in his camp, because they're all little, including the so wonderful Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles. They're so wonderful. They're also a little meshuggah. He's got Corey Lewandowski there, was totally meshuggah. And so I don't know who that is who could tell him, you need to buckle down for 5 days and do debate prep and do another debate and erase the impression of this debate and put her on the back foot and start defining her. But if he doesn't have that, then maybe structurally he can still win. Maybe the country, she really is just too liberal existentially, and the country is not going to go for her.
The campaign should have like an office of the truth's advocate, like the devil's advocate during a canonization process.
Right, yeah.
You know?
Exactly. Yeah. But of course he can't stand. Anyway, so this is all science. One of the funny things about the last day to me is how many conversations I've had with people who said, he could have done this. He should have done that. There was this moment when he could have done this. What about that? He should have had the opening, the final thing he said should have been his opening statement. Why didn't he do that? Everybody on earth who, even if you don't want him to win, sort of just as a matter of performance, it's like if you see someone miscast performing a part wrong, even if you don't, it's not really, you're like, you know what he could have done? He could have, maybe if he wore a different costume or something like that, it's just sort of like performance skill criticism. And I don't know, everybody I know had advice for him.
Well, it's because he missed everything. He missed every opportunity.
Right. So I just think it's amazing how much good advice I heard from him yesterday, and from people, from just regular fun. I mean, they're not exactly regular folks, but you know what I mean. Like, I heard really good advice. They can't not have it in Mar-a-Lago. Like, people are normal, and they could, but I don't know. So finally, we get to her, and then the question is, did she do what she needed to do in this sense, which is she won the debate against him. That's probably the number one thing. But she does have 56 or 55 days left to go, and she's still going to have to talk. And she said the same thing during the debate that she said to Dana Bash and that she said in her convention speech on Israel, on Ukraine, on everything. She is just, candidates are supposed to be disciplined and say the same thing over and over again. But I mean, can this be it? Is she going to really coast on these vapors? Assuming there's no more debates, or even if there are.
I mean, she might. I was reading a media piece yesterday, and actually, I have a hard out. I got to get out of here in a little bit.
Okay.
But I was reading a media piece yesterday, and the campaign is going to focus on doing what Donald Trump is doing, when Donald Trump is doing what Barack Obama did in 2012, which is these alternative media venues. And they're very focused on, and you're going to see a lot of pieces in the coming days about how they're going to alternative media venues and the cord cutting era. This is how you reach their voters and what have you. And we get a big clue about what the electorate that Donald Trump wants to turn out in November looks like from his media appearances. It is, these alternative podcasts that are not political, that cater to young males, and that's the demo that they want to turn out. And Harris is going to pop cultural venues that cater in particular to young single women. That's who they want to turn out. And maybe both campaigns seem to think that they don't need the press anymore. And the big winner, I think the campaigns are making the right call there. The media is an outdated vehicle for reaching mass audiences these days. Conventional media, like they say, the campaign, the quote that stuck out at me is that she doesn't need to do a 60 minutes interview. And you know what? They're right. They're 100% right.
I also think that from her debate performance, while she did well in all sorts of ways, nothing she said indicates that she's ready to take on questions in a granular way and actually tell the people where she is and why she's there. So she's definitely going back into her joy cocoon.
Okay, well, Noah, you said you got to go. You're off on a train. You're leaving on a jet train. So enjoy your day, enjoy your night, enjoy your trip to Washington, D.C., where some people will probably see you in a foreign policy debate this evening. And it's been great to have you back. And of course, this will be far from the last time. And you will be there on November 17th at the Sharansky roast, as you are every year. So thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Okay, so I have a commentary recommends, but if you guys have one, I would let you trump me, so to speak. No? All right, I'm going with my commentary recommends then. I'm reading a very interesting book about one of the 3 or 4 greatest American films, and maybe one of the 3 or 4 greatest films ever made. It's called Making the Best Years of Our Lives by Alison McCord. And what it sounds like. It's about the making of the 1946 film, The Best Years of Our Lives, directed by William Wyler, written by Robert E. Sherwood, winner of 6 or 7 Academy Awards that year. And it is I read a lot of these kinds of books. This is one of the best I've ever read, because it goes into sort of remarkable granular detail about the lives of the people who made this movie, how they came to make it, what it was about World War II that made this a necessary and urgent project that you would not necessarily have thought people would have wanted to see, and how it hit the country like a tidal wave. Best Years of Our Lives is a story of 3 servicemen coming back at the conclusion of the war to the same hometown. One of them is an upper bank vice president, played by Frederick March, who went in his late 30s into service, has 3 kids. One of them is a sort of a teenager or about to be, sort of like in her 20s. One of them is a soda jerk, worked at the local fountain at the Woolworths, and is the one who rose to the highest level and became sort of, he was a lieutenant or a captain or something like that. Really, an important position in the military, comes back and has to once again go back to work as a working class guy in this somewhat demeaning job that he has, with a slatternly wife who has clearly been stepping out in town while he was gone. And the third is a profoundly disabled guy who had his hands blown off in battle and has hooks for hands and has to come home to a loving girlfriend whom he desperately tries to push away because he thinks that he will only be a victim to her, and that he doesn't want to saddle her with him, and he doesn't want to feel disrespected by her. And the drama and then they all 3 get tangled up with each other. So it's one of the most beautiful movies ever made. It has sequences in it that knock your socks off. In particular, a sequence where Frederick March goes to what's called an airplane graveyard, and walks through where these decommissioned planes are, and through the expression on his face and the way he acts, you understand that he has been through an extraordinarily traumatic experience as a pilot or as whatever he was, fighting in this war without ever seeing them fight in the war. And we obviously have the same experience with Harold Russell, the actor who himself lost his hands, not in war, actually, in an accident during a training exercise in the United States, but then became this sort of master at using his hooks for hands, and had never acted before, and not only won a supporting actor Oscar, but a special. They wanted to make sure he had an Oscar at the end of this experience, so they gave him a special Oscar, and he won Best Supporting Actor. Anyway, it's an astonishing movie. But mostly, what's interesting about it is it tells the story of the people who made it. And William Wyler, who was the director, maybe the greatest of all Hollywood directors, who had gone into the film corps in World War II to make documentaries for the military, along with John Ford and Frank Capra and others who made these amazing, and he made a particularly amazing one called Memphis Belle. That was Wyler's documentary. And in the course of his time flying and he was fearless. He was a man in his he was a sort of chubby immigrant Jew in his mid-30s, climbing around these planes, flying at 30,000 feet, where it was 50 degrees below zero on the plane, with with what was actually like a glass oxygen tube that he was sort of sucking air through. And there were some explosions, and he lost hearing in both of his ears. He went deaf. And he came down to Earth. The plane landed, and he was deaf in both ears. And then he recovered hearing in one ear, but had lost the hearing in his other ear for the rest of his life. And he did not have 100% hearing in his ear, and had to himself go through this rehabilitation. And, therefore this movie is as a astoundingly heartfelt portrait of something that you would think at the end of this war, people would only have wanted good news, would only have wanted happy news, would only have wanted, cheerful portraits of life as it was coming back to American life. And this incredibly rich tapestry of this small city in the Midwest that you see, and the experiences of these guys, is just astounding. And Alison McCord tells it really beautifully in this book, Making the Best Years of Our Lives. So I strongly recommend this to anyone who, even if you're not that interested in film history, it really is a kind of slice of American cultural and military history as well. So that is today's Commentary Recommends. Abe, you must be a Wyler guy.
Yeah, and I love the movie. I mean, I adore the movie. But as with everything I read and see, I forget 90% of it about 2 years after. And I haven't seen Best Years of Our Lives in about 10, 15 years, so forget it.
Good excuse to rewatch it, though. That's a good.
Yeah. Oh,
it's just to rewatch it. I mean, there are three or four sequences in it that, there is a moment when Frederick March arrives home to his lavishly appointed upper middle class apartment and opens the door and walks in, and his children see him, and he tells them to be quiet, silences them because he's come home a little early, and because he wants his wife, played by Myrna Loy, to see him. He wants to surprise her. And then there is this moment where she sees him down a long hallway, and it's filmed by this great cinematographer, Greg Toland, who is the famous deep focus cinematographer. That is a guy who could get everything in one frame without anything losing focus. And it's, maybe the greatest shot in one of the two or three greatest moments in film history. So it's right there. I think it's on Max for you to watch, and watch it, and then read Alison McCord's book, because it is sensationally good. Okay, so we will be back tomorrow. It was fantastic to have Noah back with us, and nostalgia for us to go through yet another Trump election with Noah. So,
but you know what? He didn't give us any of the greatest hits. There was no briefly. There was no incentive structure.
I was waiting.
Solipsism.
No sotto voce.
Right. Solipsism.
What else? To come back and hit all those marks.
Okay. So, well, as I said, we'll be back tomorrow. So for Abe and Christina, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.